Oh, do you find it odd to hear the word afraid with a great man of God? Isn't the Bible wonderful that it's so real? Faith is not the absence of fear. Neither is it the absence of doubt. It's facing both and obeying anyway. Now in verse 25 through 32, we got some real test for Gideon. That same night, now he just got through worshiping. That same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to the Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of the high, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. Now that's a scary thing. We don't understand it in our culture, but this was destroying the household, family gods, and the gods that whole village was worshiping, were worshiping. It's like saying, going into a Native American village back in when we first found in this country, and going to the totem pole and setting it on fire. It's like going into another culture's temple, going into a Buddhist temple and tearing the thing apart. I mean, you don't do that without risking your life. I mean, God was asking Gideon to do something. Now, he's not asking him going out against 135,000 soldiers like he will in a few days. He's asking him to do what he said in his own village. That's the test. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. Would you say it with me? And did as the Lord told him. Now, God will give you some liberty. He doesn't tell you all the details. Some of us, we get a word from God and we don't know. You know, some of us will be like this. God says, Gideon, go destroy the Baal, knock it down, tear down the Asherah pole, make an altar and burn that second bull on this altar. And I'd say, now, God, I got to know. Do I do it in the morning or afternoon? Am I supposed to do it at night or day? Am I supposed to wear a certain thing when I do it? I need more information, God. I want to know. I want to do it right, God. You know, it's a trap of the devil to ask God for more than He gave you. Just obey with what you've got. Most of us like, if we were Abraham and God called us and said, hey, I want you to leave your family and leave Harrisburg and go to some other place where I'll tell you. I say, okay, God, let me get my plan together. And when are you going to tell me where we're going? I'll go. I promise you, God, I'll go. Just tell me where I'm going. Silence. Can't be God. He's not telling me. I mean, God's not a God of confusion. I mean, it's foolish to go to somewhere I'm going where? I don't even know where I'm going. God just said go. Jackie Pullinger Toll would have never got on that ship, and when God said get on a ship and go around the world and I'll show you where to get off. Just like Abraham. Most of us, oh, wait a minute, Lord, I'll get on the ship. I promise you I'll get on the ship. Just tell me where I'm going. Tell me how I'm going to live when I get there. And I can't go yet, God. I got to raise my support. This thing of obedience, and I mean, there needs to be some wisdom, but if God says, I want you to go now, you don't wait to raise support. You go now. And God told him that night, do it. Now, we like to procrastinate. God, I'm going to do it. I have every intention to do it. God, you look at my heart. You know my heart. God, I'm going to do it. I want to obey you, God, in everything. I just want to wait till all the men are gone. They're going to be, in 2 months from now, they're all going to go on a hunting trip, and that's when I'll do it. He did it that very night. Now, he also had wisdom. The reason we know he had wisdom, look in verse 27. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him, but because he was afraid. Oh, do you find it odd to hear the word afraid with a great man of God? Isn't the Bible wonderful that it's so real? Faith is not the absence of fear. Neither is it the absence of doubt. It's facing both and obeying anyway. You say, I'm just afraid. So was Gideon. Man, I get fearful. Someone told me, I get nervous before I preach, and I shouldn't. I said, man, I haven't been able to eat breakfast for 26 years before I preach because I get diarrhea from nervous. I've been doing it 26 years. Afraid because of the awesomeness. But that doesn't mean, but I still do it. I still get up there and believe God. I'm scared to death, but I believe your promise. Now, some of us, unless you hear somebody admit they have to face their fear, and you think, well, God couldn't use me because I have fear in my life. Now, we know the Bible. We can beat each other up, the Bible. Perfect love casts out all fear. Well, it does cast out all fear, but I don't always walk in perfect love. And I don't feel like I have to be 100% perfect because the devil will come and even beat us up with the Scripture and make you feel like you can't be used of God because you're not perfected yet. Well, I don't know if this is helping you, but this is helping me. But because he's afraid of his family and the men of the town, and sometimes the very first thing God asks you to do will cost you something, usually with your family. And this is hard, but if you want to follow God, often it will be your family who won't understand. It'll be your family that, you guys, you're going to a cult. How many of us have had family at one time think we were in a cult because we didn't worship the way they used to? Just weird. But he did it at night rather than in the daytime because he was afraid. He knew it was dangerous. He had this guy's wisdom. He said, if I'm going to get this thing done, I know when to do it. I'm going to time it. When they're asleep, I'm going to do it. Now, he was brave enough, and he knew he was supposed to obey God, and he had smarts. He knew where to do it. He had common sense. Do it at night. In the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished with the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? And when they carefully investigated, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did it. Now, to show you how dangerous this was, the men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Now, Gideon's father was a pretty smart man too. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is God, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. So that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him because he broke down Baal's altar. Now, what has just happened? God gave him a test. God gave him a call. There was visitation, and there was an immediate test. Will you obey me in this thing? Now, I've called you to defeat an army of 135,000 men. But before you do that, you cannot have power when there's syncretism. I must be God, me alone. You can't trust these other gods of Baal and Asherah. You must break, to cut down, here's what he's saying, to cut down the Baal's altar, tear it down, and destroy the Asherah pole. Those were the gods that they believed they got power from. I want to tell you something. You'll never know the power of God if you're trusting in horoscopes. You'll never know the power of God you'll never know healing power of God if you're looking to crystals. You cannot mix New Age religion with Christianity. You cannot. They are diametrically opposed to each other. You cannot trust God if you're trusting mammon. God is going to say, you're going to have your whole trust in me. That's why sometimes God would tell people to give everything they had away so they couldn't trust in their own ability to finance what God was telling them to do. Having to trust God. Now, he doesn't tell everybody that, but those that made money their idol, often he will. Now, in verse 33, we're beginning another thing. We've moved out of the time of testing, and he passed the test. He did it. How many of you, you don't have to raise your hand, but you just know there's been a time of testing lately. There's been a time of testing. God's been asking you for some stuff. He's been asking you to obey in some areas. And I tell you, if we don't obey in these areas, we forfeit the right to know His glory. We forfeit the right to move into that place of victory and power, and we will still remain vanquished rather than victor, defeated rather than the deliverer, never becoming the mighty warrior of God. Now let's look at verse 33. It's interesting that this verse begins with the word in my translation, now. The timing of God is so important. Now something happens. You see, God understands all history. God sees everything from beginning to the end of history and time, sees it all at once. And He's able to direct by divine appointments and timing things in our lives. Now we look back, and often we can look back on our life and see how God, when we don't know it at the time we're basically ignorant that God was setting this thing up. But looking back later in life, we can look on these things and see God's hand in our life. This is one of those times. Now, when, after Gideon just passed the test, God had timed it just right, that He had His man ready when he was needed. See, I want you to put your faith not in Gideon. It says he's just a weak kid, scared to death, but in His God. The grace here. See, look at the grace that we've already seen. God knew he needed this victory under his belt. God knew he needed to be encouraged. God needed to put some backbone in him because he was so scaredy cat. And God's been giving him that ability. Now all the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. That's interesting. It's getting worse. He obeyed. And he obeyed in what we usually think, I obeyed you, God, bring the blessings. He obeyed God. And immediately the Amalekites and the Midianites joined forces, and they're stronger than they ever were before, and they're invading the land. And he says, oh God, is this the way you treat me? I obeyed you. But what he doesn't know is God's setting this up to show Himself and give His own victory in His way. Then, and that's interesting, watch. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. When? After the call, after the testing, at the time it was needed in the battle. Now, the enemy comes in, then the Spirit of the Lord comes down. Sometimes we just don't want any problems in our life. You know, don't you love the miracles of the Bible? Don't you just love the miracles? How many of you would like to have experienced one of those miracles? Raise your hand. I'd like a miracle in my life. Wave them if you like a miracle in your life. Well, I got good news for you. All you have to have a miracle in your life is crisis in your life. All you need to have a miracle in your life is being one of those places where there's no way out. And ultimate defeat is looking you in the face. How many like a miracle? That's still taking one. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, the ram's horn, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also to Asher, to Zebulun, to Naphtali. So they too went up to meet him. Now, the interesting thing that these guys went to meet. Why would they follow this kid? Why would they follow this young guy, the least of his family? Because God's anointing's on him. And God's given him favor. And you know what? He's got a plan. Now this is real important. Charles, this is important for you. Randy, this is important for you. Because we probably a little bit alike in this. We get God's promise. We've tried to obey. We've gone through a time of cleansing. And we know what He's told us to do. And we concoct a plan. It's a good plan. It really makes sense in the natural according to our best ability to plan this thing. He's going to get an army together. Well, doesn't that make sense? If you're going to come against an army of 135,000 people, and God said, I'm going to deliver them into your hand, it makes sense. Let's get some army. Let's get some people together. Smart Gideon. Verse 36, Gideon said to God, now, these ifs make me nervous. You see, as he's getting ready to go into battle, he's still got some questions. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, Look, I'll place a wool fleece on the threshing floor, and if there's dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that will save Israel by my hand, as you said. You said. That's serious prayer. He's reminding God of God's promises, and that's wisdom. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Gideon was afraid. He's praying back the promises of God. He's already asked for one sign. He's asking for another sign. God, if this is really you. Now, God doesn't get mad. God actually gives him the sign. God is the one who gave him the faith. God built Gideon into the warrior he became. It's every whit God. It's every bit grace. It's not Gideon. I mean, he's trying to obey, but he's being honest. He's admitting he's afraid. I'm glad he didn't deny his faith. I'm glad he didn't deny his fear. I'm glad he just didn't say, bless God, I'm an overcomer, and did all that stuff. But inside, he's scared to death. I'm glad he admitted, I'm afraid. God, I need a sign. Verse 38 or verse 39. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew. And that night God did so. Only the fleece was dry and all the ground was covered with dew. Now we're into the next part. When we have God creating faith through prophecy or prophetic action. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all of his men camped by the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into your hands. Now he had 32,000. He's coming against an army of 135,000. That is, he's outnumbered 4-1. I think he may have argued with God. I would have wanted to argue with God. What do you mean too many men? I'm already outnumbered 4-1. I want more men. And God says, no, you got too many. Now this is where we move. God almost always asks us to do something that doesn't make sense, that doesn't fit in a natural way. That's why when my son was having an asthma attack one time, he's around 9 years old, we had to come home because it was a very bad asthmatic attack. And a woman in our group, that we'd been a home group we was in, she called us. She said, I'm embarrassed to say this to you, but after you guys on the way home, you were driving home, I had this mental picture, this vision, and I saw you make toast and take 2 pieces of toast and put it on your son's chest and then take a towel and cover it up, and he'll be healed of this asthma attack. Now, how'd you like to get a word like that for your pastor? 2 pieces of toast and a towel. My wife looked at me and told me what she had said, and then she said, what do you think? And I said, that sounds like God. Because none of the stuff he asked people to do, make mud, put it in their eyes, go dip in that river 7 times, march around Jericho 7 times, don't say anything, and last and blow the trumpet and yell out and shout. That doesn't make sense either. None of this stuff makes sense. It's not supposed to make sense. If it made sense, you wouldn't have to do it, but it wouldn't take faith to do it. It'd be a natural thing to do. And my wife said, what do you think we ought to do? I said, it sounds like God, let's do it. And we got to wondering, well, should we butter the toast or leave it plain, you know? I mean, my son's here. You can ask him about it. This really happened. And we decided, since he didn't say butter it, we didn't butter it. We made 2 pieces of toast, put it on his chest, and went and got a little towel, placed it on him, and as soon as we did, he started throwing up. Now, what you don't know if you haven't had an asthmatic child is that when a child that is an asthma attack throws up, it releases natural theophylline into his lungs, and it broke the attack. Immediately, he came out of the attack. Now, It doesn't make sense, God. I'm already outnumbered 4-1. In order that Israel may not boast against me, that her own strength has saved her. Announce now to the people. Now you're outnumbered 4-1. Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left while 10,000 remained. I imagine they're saying, oh my God, I got up on the wrong side of the bed today. Oh God, where are they going? Gideon, the thing of this thing is, the anointing on Gideon for his men to stay loyal to him must have been something else. Really. 22,000. Now they're outnumbered 13-1 in the odds. But the Lord said to Gideon, there's still too many. Too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them there for you. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. Then the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink. 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouth. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. Now, note Gideon's obedience. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place. And so Gideon gets up and said, okay, everybody that knelt down and drank, God says you're to go back. How'd you like to be one of those that lapped like this? Whoa, wait a minute. Where are they going? Hey, there's just 300 of us. Oh, now we got 450-1 odds. How would you like to be one of the 300? I'd like to have been one of the ones, oh, I'm sure glad I knelt down today. God does love me. How do those others felt? Oh, are you sure, Gideon? Now this thing gets more ludicrous. Ludicrous in the sense of God testing obedience. You see, God didn't need any of them actually. He could have done it with an angel. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets and the others. Now the camp of the Midianite lay below him in the valley. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, now notice how often Gideon's getting communication from God. I bet he's by this time saying, oh God, don't talk to me again. Every time you've come, you've shortened. Every time you've done something, I've got less men. You're coming again. I imagine he's thinking, oh, when God gets done, I may not have but just me and my friend. But what did Gideon do? What did God do to Gideon? He tested him in every one of these things. He went against natural and was asking just blind faith. Will you trust me in this? And it sure didn't make sense. And that's something I got to get across to a rationalistic people of God in 20th century America. For us to think it's got to make sense. The Lord said to Gideon, get up and go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, do you think God didn't know? It says he knows our thoughts. Even before we speak a word, he knows what we have. He knows our hearts. He knows us better than we know ourselves. So it's not a matter of God needing some information about Gideon's state. It's God accommodating himself to where Gideon's at. And with such tenderness here, if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. Do you see how much God is accommodating Gideon? You know, Gideon would have never have gotten this word if he had disobeyed on these first things. He would have never have gotten to this place. Was he afraid? Oh, yeah, he's afraid. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outpost of the camp. The Midianites and the Amalekites and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camel could no more be counted than the sand of the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend a dream. God gives dreams. God uses dreams. Now, this is interesting. We got prophetic dream. We got divine appointment, all happening at once. We had God speaking to Gideon, God giving a man a dream, God setting up the timing. Just think about the timing. God is a master divine appointment maker. He gets him there just in time to hear exactly the right man out of it. Notice, if you have camels like locusts, so many people, I mean, there's like the sand of the sea. And we know the army alone was 135,000 men, and God gets Gideon there close enough to hear the one man out of 135,000. He shows up. Just think of the supernatural part of that. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling to the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. I mean, that's the enemy interpreting, an unbeliever giving an interpretation to a dream that God was setting this thing up to give faith to Gideon. I want to tell you, I think that's the way God works. I think if you will obey him, I will obey him. If we face things that scare us to death, it's, boy, the vision's so much bigger. It really is from God. He's spoken to us. He's confirmed it by signs. I'm telling you, don't give up. Don't give up on it. Oh, we want to see the miraculous. Let's do the obedient. Let's be obedient in these things. I tell you, God is able in a moment to give you a greatest victory that you've ever seen. He can give you Harrisburg. God can give you. He can make it into a city of refuge. He can bring down the enemy. And I think he's wanting to. But we have to be listening and obeying and being honest. And we hit something that he tells us is so big that we ask him, God, I need a sign. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped God. I was scared to death when I was called by John Arnott to go to Toronto. Scared to death. Man, I was so scared. I went down to Lake Worth, Florida, where Rodney was at again, and got prayer 2 weeks before I was going to go. I was scared God wouldn't show up for me. He'd show up for anybody else maybe, but not me. I was just so scared. And the night before I was to fly out on January the 20th, January the 19th at 10 o'clock, with God knowing, and I agreed to go, scared to death, feeling inadequate, telling John, why do you want me to come? It probably won't happen again. And on January the 19th, a man calls me from Texas, Baptist guy named Richard Holcomb. And he says, Randy, I've got the second most clear word for you I've ever had in the last 10 years. Talk about divine timing, 10 o'clock, and just right, go to bed, get up the next morning to go to Toronto. I've faced the fear, done all I knew how to do, and I'm still fearful. I'm not confident at all God will show up, but I'm going anyway. And he calls me and said, I got the second most clear word for you I've ever had. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, the Lord says, test me now, test me now, test me now. Do not be afraid. I will back you up. I want your eyes to be open to see my resources for you in the heavenlies, just as Elijah prayed that Gehazi's eyes would be open. And do not become anxious, because when you become anxious, you can't hear me. I want you to know that word, just like this word for this dream, Gideon heard it. He worshiped. Man, it lifted off the fear. It lifted off the burden. I was so excited. I knew God had spoken to me through this man. And I went from, I hope God comes, to saying, I know God's coming. Annie and Gary got in a van with me, my son, and a couple of other people, another pastor and his wife from our church. And I said, we're getting ready to go on an apostolic mission trip to a country we've never been to before, and we're going to see more than we've ever seen in our life. Where did that faith come from? I didn't work it up. It wasn't that I made it happen. It wasn't that I worked and worked and worked, and I think we should study the Word, and I think as we study the Word, we gain more faith. But this type of supernatural faith, this gift of faith came because I'm trying to walk through obedience. God knew I was afraid, and He knew that I'd done everything I knew how to do, and He gave me the faith, His gift. You know what's brilliant? God did it. If He hadn't, I'd failed. I know I would have failed. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has," he's got it in the past tense. The Lord, he didn't say the Lord's going to give. He said the Lord has given. Isn't that interesting? The Lord has given, as far as he's concerned, it's a done deal. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. I want you to know, don't despise the prophetic, because the prophetic, why would Paul say, do not despise the prophetic? Because in the guise of prophetic, there's so many words that comes that aren't prophetic. They're kind of pathetic rather than prophetic, that we can despise the pathetic words. But we got to allow those pathetic words and discern the Word of God, so that we can receive, because it is that prophetic word to a congregation and to an individual that literally can break off fear and give you confident faith, that literally can move mountains. And so you need to be listening for the prophetic word of God. And in these last days, I think there'll be more prophetic words coming, and it's one of the means by which He will encourage His people. And I want you, as I said earlier, how many of you feel like God has spoken things into your life and given you things, spoken to you about? Pray Him back to Him. Pray and obey in the little things along the way. And then down in verse 6, dividing the 300 men into the 3 companies, He placed trumpets and empty jars in their hands of all of them with torches inside. Now, I just got to do this. I heard a friend of mine tell this part of the story over in England. He said, just picture up, here drives up all the trucks. And he said, okay, guys, I need your shields. Why does he need their shields? Wait. I want you to have a jar in one hand and a trumpet in the other. Now, if you got a jar in one hand and a trumpet in the other, where's your shield? Where's your sword? I mean, the shield's what? Protection. He said, I will be your protection. And I imagine this conveyance vehicle, whether it be an ox or something, a truck of our day, and he says, I want all the shield, and piled them in. And the guy, there's only 300 of us, and now they're taking away our shields. And I'm standing there, we're gonna blow trumpets and wave a torch. That's the plan. If I'm waving this torch, I'm a target for an archer. I'm in the dark. They'll be able to see me. We're going to give up our surprise attack. We're going to let them know we're out there, and we're going to shout. 450 to 1. Defenseless. No shield. Can we really trust God to be our defense? That's what God was after. Can you trust my word and me to be your defense? Boy, I mean, when you get that off the felt board and bring it down in reality, that's quite a story, isn't it? Sunday school felt board, we can hear things so much we forget what it was really like for those guys. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, He placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all them with torches inside. Watch me, He told them. Follow my lead. And when I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. And they did it. And they shouted. And down in verse 23, when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The Lord caused the men throughout the camp, the 135,000 army, to turn on each other with their swords. And then the army begins to flee. Verse 23, the Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were called out. Now, having routed the enemy with 300 men, having routed the enemy with a minority, with a remnant, this is good news because we are a remnant, but there is going to be a victory. If we will obey, it's going to be the 300, it's going to be the remnant, it's going to be those crazy people, it's going to be those fanatics, it's going to be, those weird radical worshipers, it's doing this weird stuff. But when we get that victory in a city, in an area, God is then going to say, all right, come on, Baptists, come on, Methodists, come on, Presbyterians, come on, Roman Catholics, come on, Anglicans, come on, Episcopals, join them and finish this battle. And that's exactly what I believe will happen because they will see that God has gotten a victory and the enemy. And we have to be we cannot have an attitude, hey, where were you when we were in the trenches? Where were you when they took our swords away? Where were you when we marched down there all by ourselves? Where was the rest of you? No, we can't say that. We have to say, thank God you're here. We welcome you to join us in this battle.